Okay, Jane-Ann, our last interview on Near FM was just over a year ago. A lot has happened in relation to ODA in many countries around the world since our last interview, Jane-Ann, and not solely because Donald Trump got re-elected president in the US. Can you start off, Jane-Ann, by giving me a summary, please, about how big and serious the cuts to ODA have been in the last year or so, and a bit about the impact they're having and they will have in the future?
Yes, of course. So, and thanks very much for having me on. What we've seen over the last year, as demonstrated by both the US and indeed the UK and other European countries, is that governments have been slashing their aid budgets. Obviously, the US was a significant donor. They were USAID. Would spend almost over 40 billion in funding on an annual basis, and that effectively has been completely cut off. So it's not only the US, but we're seeing the UK also scale back on their commitments in terms of how much they're giving in terms of overseas aid. But we're also seeing other European countries do so. And really, from Dóchas and from our members, who are like our members are international organizations who are working on the ground in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, in Southern America. They are on the ground working in and through local communities, and they're seeing the direct impact these cuts are having. If you look at it from macro level, there are more than 300 million people in need of humanitarian assistance and protection, and a record 120 million people around the world are displaced. So if you want to break that down, you see that 1 in every 5 children in the world, approximately 400 million children, are living in or fleeing conflict zones. And that is a frightening statistic. What we're seeing is that there's a high level of instability, and it's women and girls who are bearing the brunt of violence, displacement, and health emergencies. And what we're seeing at a time now when, the humanitarian needs are increasing significantly, when we're seeing more need than ever in terms of the need of investment in sustainable solutions. What we're seeing is donors walking away. The donors, including the US, European donors, the UK, are slashing their overseas aid budgets, and that's essentially dismantling many aid systems which are there to support those who are furthest behind.
Yeah, I know we heard a lot about 6 months ago about USAID. People were going mad about it. But it's also very disappointing with the UK because I think it was David Cameron who brought in he reached the 0.7% target, and I think he got it written into law, didn't he? That it was always
Mm-hmm.
going to be there, and now that's totally gone. It was totally reversed, isn't it?
It is, and the UK was definitely one of the leading countries in as you said, setting into law about reaching 0.7%, and they achieved that. But yes, what we're seeing is they're now, trying to see how they can undo that, how they can scale that back and reduce it down to zero point 0.3. And it's a really worrying trend that we're seeing. Not only that there's there's a decrease in aid, but that governments are saying that they need to spend this on defence instead or military reasons. And what we're saying is that, obviously countries need to have defence budgets, that's one thing. But what we're saying is that aid and humanitarian development assistance is absolutely vital contributor to global stability. It is vitally important that people can sustain themselves, can sustain their livelihoods, can live and work in their own communities, and are able to access services. What we're seeing now as a result of the aid cuts is that people will continue to move because they can no longer, support the resources. They can no longer access the resources close to them. We know the clinics are closing down in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that people are no longer able to get their antiretroviral drugs. They're no longer able to access food in the local food centre, and they're no longer getting support for their own livelihoods. And so people will move, but it will also create greater instability. And that is what we're going to see, that you need to invest in communities. If you want to have a safe world, we need to invest in communities on the ground and ensure they can sustain themselves and have the resources to do so.
Okay, and on this issue of ODA, overseas development assistance, yourselves and Dóchas launched a campaign a couple of weeks ago called Lives on the Line. Can you tell me more about
Yeah, so us and our members, like I said, who are all international development humanitarian organisations, we launched the Lives in Our Line campaign to highlight the devastating impact that cuts cause. So saying, we know that cuts cost lives. We know that this is already having a direct impact on people's lives, particularly in least developed countries around the world, in fragile countries and countries affected by conflict. And what we're saying is that Ireland, however, can show leadership during this time. And we want Ireland, to represent our values on the global stage, not only in terms of our voice in different platforms at an EU level, in other fora, of being able to say the importance of overseas aid, that we know that it works, we know it can have a positive impact on people's lives, we know it can transform people's lives, and we've seen the benefit of that over the years where we've made significant gains, again, in reducing poverty. But we also need Ireland to actually step forward in terms of how much we are contributing to our overseas aid budget. We have had the long-standing commitment that we will reach 0.7%, as you mentioned, by 2030. We're only really at 0.34, and it's absolutely critical that Ireland continues to increase our overseas aid budget, that we are saying to those who are furthest behind, who are in the least developed countries, you are not alone, that we are working in solidarity with you, that we believe that we can support you. And we are not doing this out of geopolitical interest, but we're doing this because of humanity and of the absolute need to support those who are most affected by crises around the world. And I do believe that is a real reflection of Ireland's values. We know from a lot of research that 3 out of 4 people in Ireland support Ireland's ODA programme. We know that, we can see every day on the streets in response to Gaza, in response to other crises, Irish people are there at the fore and are very empathetic to those who are caught up in crisis. And we believe it's imperative that Ireland continues that legacy on the world stage in terms of our own contributions and does not go with other European countries or indeed the US in looking at a transactional approach to aid, but really looking at what is it is intended for, and that is for saving lives and alleviating suffering.
Okay, Jane-Ann, I should maybe have mentioned at the start of our interview, but since our last interview on Near FM over a year ago, there is a new Minister of State for International Aid in Ireland, Neil Richmond from Fine Gael. Can you tell me, Jane-Ann, if you have any idea as to whether Neil Richmond may be able to leave a lasting legacy during his term in terms of the ODA budget in Ireland over the next few months and for the next couple of years?
Yeah, no, and I've met Minister Richmond at a number of times over the last few months, and I do believe that he has significant leadership, obviously, but he's particularly in this area. He is very interested in the area of humanitarian and development assistance, and he firmly believes in it. And I think this is really important that Ireland has somebody like Minister Richmond who is out there, whether it was at the Financing for Development conference in Seville last week, whether it's in our representations at the G20, or indeed in our engagements, bilateral engagements with other European countries and with the Global South, that we have somebody who is out there and saying that we know that Ireland's aid works. We have seen it, we've seen the impact of it, and Minister Richmond is a real champion of that, and we do believe, and we would encourage him, that we go a step further and demonstrate that leadership through our overseas aid budget, through ensuring that we get an increase in the next budget, to ensure that we as Ireland step forward when others are stepping back and saying we will stand in solidarity, and we believe in the principles of supporting those who are the furthest behind, who are marginalised, who are not getting access to services within their own countries, but we know that we can continue to support them and support in providing those services and providing support to those communities. And I think that's something that we hope that Minister Richmond will continue to do so, not only in the coming months ahead, but in the coming years ahead, and politically, because a lot of this is down to political will, and we know there are multiple challenges this government have to face, but this is one where we know Irish people believe in it, they stand by it, they want to stand in solidarity with those in the global south, and we think it's important that we represent those values, and the Minister Richmond does so too.